Faith reinforced Wilson's solitude. It gave sanction to his ambitions for personal success and worldly honors. It justified him transforming his own deepest convictions. In the 1890s, Wilson was a conservative Democrat. Grover Cleveland was in the White House. I won't bore you with all the details, but basically Wilson was someone who was a basic conservative. After Cleveland's presidency, the mood of the country changed. The mood of the Democratic Party changed dramatically thanks to William Jennings Bryan. The future was not conservative. The future of the Democratic Party was liberal, populist, and the like. And guess what? Woodrow Wilson was no longer a conservative. In fact, he came up with some wonderful one-liners putting conservatism down. He said, a conservative is someone who just sits and thinks, mostly sits. He also defined the essence of conservatism in one sentence as, make no change, and when in doubt, consult your grandmother. Wilson's own words, spoken in 1907, may suggest how he justified this transformation. A politician, he explained, a man engaged in party contests must be an opportunist, because although you steer by the North Star, when you have lost the bearings of your compass, you nevertheless steer a pathway to the sea. Ambition, I would suggest, was Wilson's compass. Faith was his North Star. Faith tolerated the brittleness of a believer with a bad stomach and the irritability that went along with that. Wilson had, as you've already gathered, precarious health. In addition to the strokes, he suffered from terrible indigestion, what he said was problems in Central America, as he described them. He had a doctor named Cary Grayson who suggested that he knew how to take care of this. Wilson should get more physical exercise. He should play golf every day. He should eat oatmeal every day. And he should, once a day, swallow a raw egg and a glass of orange juice. Wilson said he liked the golf. He didn't mind the oatmeal, but every time he swallowed the raw egg, he felt like he was swallowing a newborn baby. In 1912, Wilson is nominated by the Democrats on a slogan, the New Freedom. It's not just a slogan. This is no mere candidate. This is a very unusual candidate. This is an intellectual. This is the only PhD in American history who ever ran for and was elected to the presidency. This was a thoughtful man who had thought long and hard about American history and what was wrong with American society at a time of great industrial growth, great riches, unevenly distributed. Wilson had what he called the New Freedom, and it was, although this may sound paradoxical, the idea was basically that he would use government to pursue freedom. He would produce both freedom from government and freedom through government. I'll give you an example. He created the Federal Trade Commission. The idea was basically turn the clock back, level the playing field, give the small businessman an equal opportunity in the economic competition with the Rockefellers and the Carnegies. The Federal Reserve, which today is the single most important instrument in controlling our economy, the Federal Reserve was Woodrow Wilson's creation. He nominated the first Jew to the United States Supreme Court, a lawyer from Boston named Louis Brandeis. Over and over again, Wilson broke with tradition. His reform agenda was something of a paradox because its promoter was the most conservative of men in his personal habits. I already mentioned he spent time on Bermuda. He loved the island. He led a petition to ban automobiles from Bermuda. Later, he showed the same passion for motoring in his White House Pierce Arrow, provided the driver never went over 20 miles an hour and never deviated from a few well-traveled routes. The originator of the New Freedom still cherished the old kerosene lamp by which he had studied as a Princeton undergraduate. The great intellectual preferred detective stories to serious fiction. Wilson said the presidency required the constitution of an athlete, the patience of a mother, the endurance of the early Christian. His constitution would be severely tested, as was his patience and ultimately his endurance. But he also had a great line that I think probably all of the newcomers who are going to D.C. in the next few days, Republicans or Democrats, mostly Democrats, would probably appreciate. Wilson said, "Every man who comes to the Capitol does one of two things. Either he grows or he swells." Wilson also said that if you want to make enemies in Washington, try to change something. His countrymen could hardly know the pattern that held throughout their president's career: initial, often dazzling accomplishment based on a clear agenda and the skills to realize it. At Princeton, for example, Wilson breathed new life into a provincial college, only to run afoul of undemocratic eating clubs. A similar breakdown occurred between Governor Wilson and the legislators of New Jersey in 1912, following a remarkably harmonious and productive freshman year. In each case, he seemed to lose his early deft touch, inflating personal differences, rejecting offers of compromise. His desire for victory, great as it was, could not equal his need for control. In fact, he was caught on an emotional treadmill. Chronic discontent lashed him to succeed, yet deprived him of the capacity to enjoy success. Each new challenge only reminded him of the pledge he made as a newly published author: to linger would be fatal. One other wonderful, surprising thing about Wilson. Again, this is a man who expands government as no president before him, and yet someone who was very, very disdainful of what you and I would call modern public relations and presidents courting the press. This was an era in American history when there were weeks designated for all sorts of admirable causes. There was Be Kind to Animals Week, and Better Homes Week, and Cleanup Week. And Woodrow Wilson, the unconventional conservative, said there really ought to be a week designated for people to mind their own business. His business became tragic just 1 year into his presidency. In the summer of 1914, Europe was about to go to war, World War I. And in his bedroom in the White House, Ellen Wilson was dying of Bright's disease, a kidney disease. And when she died, her husband was absolutely crushed. Woodrow Wilson needed women. He needed the love of a woman. He needed the support of a woman. He needed the confidence that came from being loved. And he was absolutely bereft. He actually thought about resigning the presidency. In lieu of resigning, he courted another woman. Her name was Edith Bowling Gall, statuesque figure. She claimed to be descended from Pocahontas. Her husband ran a jewelry store in Washington, and matchmaking friends brought them together, and instantly there was a spark. The problem was Wilson's political advisors didn't want him to get remarried. There was a re-election coming up in 1916, and they thought he would forfeit all the sympathy that he had gotten as a result of the death of his wife if he were to marry this Rubenesque figure, Edith Bowling Gall. Well, Wilson overrode their objections. He married Mrs. Gall, and there's a wonderful scene on their honeymoon on the train the next morning. This 59-year-old austere academic, that we all envision, was seen by a Secret Service man walking down the aisle of the train, jumping in the air, clicking his heels, and singing a popular song of the day, "Oh, you beautiful doll, you great big beautiful doll." When a German U-boat sank the passenger liner Lusitania in May 1915, Wilson wrote a stiffly worded note to Berlin. Publicly, he declared that there was such a thing as a man or nation being too proud to fight. Many Americans disagreed. 2 years later, in the face of continuing submarine attacks, he did an about-face. Avenging maritime losses was not enough for Wilson's crusading spirit. The world must be made safe for democracy, the president told Congress. Then, as now, that's a tall order.